If you had the pleasure of driving with me in my car, you know that I am not a typical Midwestern driver. I would say I'm a typical Polish driver, and I use my horn very liberally. I love to honk at people all the time, because my philosophy is, if I curse and yell in my car, they cannot hear me. What's the point of cursing and yelling to myself? They should know that I am upset with them, so I use that horn quite a lot, and it gets the expected reaction usually. I don't like using my fingers to communicate my message, but they do. In the season of Lent, I have made a resolution not only to limit my horn usage, but also instead of honking all the time, perhaps say a prayer for those idiots, or for those people who don't know how to drive in the fast lane. So now I am very, very conscious of my temptations to push that horn, and instead I've been saying many prayers in these last few weeks of Lent. There are many people who need those prayers on our highways in St. Louis. I get upset with people driving too slow or too fast, or being unable to make up their mind when to turn, when to stop, when to make a U-turn. And for the longest time, I thought that this is something, that anger issue is something I should work on. But then I remembered from my moral theology classes in the seminary that anger is a feeling, is an emotion, right? And moral theology says that emotions have no moral value. Listen to that. Emotions have no moral value. We are not responsible morally for how we feel. It's not your fault that you are angry. It's not your fault you are sad. It's not your fault that you are happy. It's not your fault that you feel any other kind of emotion. Emotions as such, in and of themselves, have no moral value whatsoever. You cannot say, Father, I have sinned because I was sad. Well, my child, being sad is not a sin. Father, I have sinned because I've been angry with those idiots on the highway. My friend, being angry is not a sin. Now, calling them idiots can be. But being angry in itself is not a sin. Being happy in itself has no positive moral value neither. You haven't done anything to make yourself feel happy or angry or sad or upset. That's very interesting that many Catholics often forget that we do not need to confess or feel bad about our emotions. So when do moral values come into the picture? When we make the choice how to act upon these emotions and feelings. There is no issue of good or bad until you make a choice what to do or what not to do. Feeling in itself is neither good or bad. It's neutral. It's your choice that gives a moral value to your life. If I choose to flip someone because they drive me crazy, that's where moral value comes into this picture. When I choose to say, Hail Mary, full of grace, that choice also has a moral value in my life. When you are sad, it's neither good or bad. When you are upset with your husband or wife, it's neither good or bad. Now, if you choose to strike him with a plate or two, then itself, again, has a moral value. In the gospel today, Jesus says, I am troubled, my soul is troubled. Some translations will have it. Jesus has feelings and emotions. When he's reflecting on his upcoming death, he says, my soul is troubled. It's only natural that he, as a human being, is troubled, is saddened, is overcome with fear and trepidation. And yet, his soul being troubled is neither good or bad. It's what he does with that fear that gives moral value to his action. In the first reading from the Old Testament, the prophet will say that God puts God's law in our hearts. A new covenant, God says, I will give to you, and this time I will not put this covenant on stone tablets, but I will write it into your hearts. Because of Hallmark, we all think that heart is all about feelings, right? I feel good about my husband or my wife or my neighbor or my priest. No. Heart in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament, heart has nothing to do with feelings. This was long before Hallmark was even invented. Heart in the Bible of our Jewish sisters and brothers is where your soul lives. This is where you make your choices and decisions, not in your brain, but in your heart in the Hebrew Scriptures. Heart doesn't mean that we will feel good about God, that we will say, oh God, you are so sweet and lovely. When God places God's law into our hearts, the intent of this action is not to make us feel good and happy and sweet. The law of God in your heart invites you to make right choices. The law of God in your heart invites you to reflect upon your feelings and make a very aware choice of how will I act upon those feelings. Your choices and your actions have moral value. Your feelings, your emotions, in and of themselves have none. In this time of Lent, I invite you not only to remember not to use your fingers as you drive, but I invite you to be aware of your feelings, be aware of how you experience the world and your friends and enemies around you, and make conscious choices on how will you choose to act upon those feelings. Amen.